Is switching jobs or job hopping in tech bad for your career? I think this is definitely one of the most interesting topics out there, especially nowadays considering the current job market and what the implications are for switching your job, whether it's every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, or even just staying at one company for more than 5 to 10 years. So first, I did want to talk a little bit about my experience switching jobs in my early career, as well as what I've seen from my friends and other coworkers, and how those experiences kind of tie back to each other, and to give a holistic picture of switching jobs in tech, as well as the long-term career impacts. So for those of you who are new to my channel, hi, my name is Sandra, and I currently work in cybersecurity as a security analyst. I have about 3.5 years of experience, and I went into my first job in cybersecurity right out of college, and I worked there for about 2.5 years, a little bit more than 2.5 years, before switching into my second job. Now, for some people, this might sound like the perfect time frame to switch jobs in your early career. For some people, this might sound too early. For some people, it might even sound too late. Now, of course, this may also differ depending on where you're at in your career. For example, in your early career, you may expect to jump around a few more times or more frequently. For example, every 1 to 3 years, compared to your mid or late career, or maybe you'll stay at a company for 5+ years and it may seem normal. And of course, this will also vary depending on the generation that you're from. For example, if you're a Gen X or Gen Y, maybe you may have stayed at a company for 10+ years, and that is pretty much the norm across your generation. So obviously, as someone who's only switched their jobs one time in their early career, and it was after 2.5 years, which I think most people would agree is a pretty standard time to switch jobs, especially for Gen Z and many millennials. I really don't have any impact on my career switching jobs. In fact, it was probably a good thing that I switched jobs because of the fact that I got a bump in salary, as well as working on more interesting work that I personally feel more connected to, as well as working for a company that I've looked up to for many years, and now I get to work here. Obviously, not everyone is going to have the same experience that I did, but I do know my other peers who have switched jobs maybe even after less than 1 year at their first job out of college, or even those who switched after just 1 year and now they're working in their second jobs and also don't seem to have that much career impact. And honestly, after the first 1 or 2 switches, that typically isn't going to be a red flag for most companies, especially if you're able to have a reason to back it up. For example, if the work just didn't align with you and wasn't what you were expected to be working on, or maybe there was an organization change and your team disbanded or now is working on something completely different. And honestly, you'd be surprised, it happens a lot in tech. Or maybe it's due to personal factors. For example, if your spouse needed to move to a different state for a job and you're not able to relocate to that new city, then maybe you had to look for a different job in that new city, or you have to look for a remote role. So there's always going to be personal reasons as well as professional reasons as to why people need to switch jobs at that 1 year mark or even before that 1 year mark. And honestly, everyone's situation is so different that I don't think it's fair for employers to say that, hey, because this person didn't work at this company for at least 2 years, that we're not even going to bother interviewing them. I don't think any companies are necessarily going to draw that straight line in the sand, even if you are in your early career or even later in your career. In fact, there may be some roles where maybe you're a contractor or maybe you're a freelancer, and it just so happened that your contract was only 6 months or 12 months or a shorter amount of time. Then as a freelancer or a contractor, you typically aren't going to be working 2+ years on a contract unless you get hired on full-time. So it is expected that you have a shorter tenure at those companies if you are working a non-full-time role. And of course, this ties back to the question of when should you switch jobs? And me and Luca did record a Tech and Boba podcast episode specifically on this topic. So I'll link that video down below if you guys want to hear more about our perspective from a conversational point of view. But like I already hinted at in the beginning of this video, is that I really think that it depends. For example, maybe you're someone who switched jobs at a year or less from your first job into your second job. Then if you stay at your second job maybe also less than a year, then that could potentially end up being a red flag for the third company that you go into if it just seems like you aren't able to stay at one job for longer than a year. But again, it will all depend on, you know, the structure of your tenure. If you're a contractor, then it is expected that you're working within your contract's terms. But you could also be someone who worked at their company for maybe 2 years or 3 years, and you're switching into your next job, and maybe you realize it's not for you and you switch after 2 months, and then you go into your next job and maybe you're there for a few years again. If you have that one job in between that's only for 2 months and you're able to give a reason to the employer that maybe it wasn't a good fit for you, maybe it didn't align with your career goals, as long as it's something that isn't repeatedly happening and there's kind of like a trend or pattern in your resume, then I think that's what's most important. Now, of course, for red flags, maybe if you're in your early career and maybe you've already had 4 jobs in the past 2 years and you worked all of them just for 6 months or so, and they all happen to be full-time jobs that are non-contractor, non-freelance, and maybe then it may seem like a red flag, but I still think that companies should ask you about those just to get your point of view and then decide how they want to move forward from there. Obviously, you won't always want to give your perspective, but you also want to put your best foot forward. So if you're able to put parentheses contractor on your resume for certain roles, for reasons why your tenure was so short at a specific company, then I would always do that just to give yourself a chance to at least get to that recruiter pre-screening interview or just that first interview in general. And of course, this may also depend on the company that you go into, the role that you're applying for, as well as the sector. For example, if you're going into the government, typically roles in the government or jobs in the government are going to have longer tenures because people tend to go into the government and tend to stay there for multiple years because of many different reasons. It could be for the benefits. For example, healthcare at a government agency may be very good. They may provide you a pension, which is something that most private sector companies or companies that aren't in the government space will not be able to provide you. Typically for normal companies, the primary retirement vehicle that they provide is the 401k and some kind of matching, but there are still some government agencies or city or state departments that provide a actual pension, and that may be a reason why you want to stay at that company or in that role, which also just happens to bring up the average tenure of someone who works in the government space or in the public sector compared to someone who's working for a financial institution. And of course, the final topic now is on long-term career impact. Now, obviously, this is going to vary across the board depending on all the factors that we discussed already. But personally, while I don't think that long-term job hopping or switching jobs every single year for a 20-year career is really going to be beneficial for you, because you're really not going to be able to learn as much if you're only at a job for a year or less. And after a while, that will eventually catch up to you. And for the most part, people switch jobs in their early career to get those first initial pay bumps or get those first initial promotions. But after a while, once you reach that senior level or that mid to senior level in your career, it's not going to be as easy to get those career jumps without an internal promotion or proving yourself at your previous roles to a new employer. But if you're only working at a company for a year or so, then that might not be enough proof for them to show that you're someone that is able to work at that next level yet. So it really does depend on where you are in your career again. But I would say in your early career, definitely take advantage of switching jobs frequently. I wouldn't say to do it every single year, but I would say every 2 or 3 years is probably a good soft spot for switching roles. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to switch jobs every 2 or 3 years, but it is kind of just a good idea every once in a while to pick your head up and look around and see where the sector is going, the types of roles that companies are hiring for, the types of skill sets that companies are looking for, as well as just what's new out there that may be a little bit different and may add to your professional development in some way, so that you're not just at a job just to go through the daily grind, but eventually you're going to get good at your job and get bored enough to want to try something new or want to try out a different sector in cybersecurity or even just a different field in general in tech or even outside of tech. And I think you should give yourself room to make those choices for yourself. Even if you think that you're doing great at your job, you never know what's out there once you start picking up your head and looking around and seeing the different types of roles that may not have even existed 5-10 years ago compared to now when you're already experienced and have those years of experience to back you up. So I actually think the career impact in your early career is actually very positive. There are even studies and surveys out there for those who switch around in their early career, have higher salaries / benefits, as well as a wider breadth of experience that can actually help them in their mid and senior career to be able to help move them forward in different roles. But of course, in the long term, this may look very different for someone who switched jobs every year for 10 years. And if they aren't working contractor or freelancing roles, then there may be some negative career impacts just because of the fact that there may be some companies that just may not want to hire you or even move forward with you as a candidate if they see that you're jumping jobs every single year. But again, it depends on the company. Some companies may not care and some companies might really care. Alright, so that's it for this video. Hopefully it gave you some insight into job hopping, my experience and what I've seen from my peers and my coworkers, as well as the pros and cons and the positive and negative long-term career trajectories of both staying at a job long-term versus switching jobs every few years. Of course, this is always going to be someone's personal choice. Some people might really love their company, love their job, have really good ways to move up in their career and stay at a company for 20 plus years and just really love every second of it. And there may be others who like to switch jobs every 2 to 3 years, maybe every 4 to 5 years, and that is just how they continue on in their career. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe and turn on post notifications. I post videos every Wednesdays and Sundays at 12 p.m. and hopefully I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!